Today at 6, we're in Glasgow, where the Climate Summit has opened with a barrage of warnings about the cost of failure. More than 100 world leaders swept into Glasgow amid massive security and the biggest summit ever hosted in the UK. Boris Johnson told fellow leaders he wanted countries to end the use of coal, to phase out petrol engines and to reverse deforestation.
The longer we fail to act, the worse it gets, and the higher the price when we are eventually forced by catastrophe to act.
If you're here today, you know what climate change is doing to us. You don't need my pain or my tears to know that we're in a crisis.
Enough of burning and drilling and mining our way deeper. We are digging our own graves.
And we'll be looking at the challenge ahead for the hundreds of negotiators here in Glasgow searching for consensus.
Also on the programme, the driver of one of two trains involved in a collision near Salisbury suffers life-changing injuries. Several others were hurt.
You're in the black and you're just like looking around, seeing if everyone's okay, and you can't just help but feel like, oh my God, what's going to happen? What's going to happen next?
The chief executive of Barclays resigns after an inquiry into links with the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
Helps it away. Over the
Jos Buttler's big hitting makes it 4 wins out of 4 for England at the T20 World Cup.
And coming up in sport on the BBC News channel, following the sacking of manager Nuno Espirito Santo, Tottenham look to the former Chelsea boss Antonio Conte.
Good evening from Glasgow, where world leaders have attended the opening ceremony of the Global Climate Summit. Those present are charged with taking momentous decisions to save the planet from a climate disaster. They heard a series of powerful appeals for action and warnings of the very high cost of failure. And this COP26 conference is widely seen as the last chance to agree the measures that are needed. Boris Johnson, who's hosting the summit, said humanity had long since run down the clock on climate change, and he said it was now 1 minute to midnight. The Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, warned that following a path of greed and selfishness would lead to destruction. And the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, said that countries were digging their own graves by failing to act on climate change. Among the goals being discussed are ending the use of coal, phasing out petrol-powered cars, and reversing the process of deforestation. Our first report on events in Glasgow is by our political editor, Laura Kunsberg.
Welcome to Glasgow. Thousands have made the trip from their countries.
Welcome to Glasgow.
The journey, nor the shivering arrival, straightforward. Their hope that the queues and the wait will be worth it. This fortnight could affect everyone's home. But the world's political leaders didn't face quite the same ordeal to swoop in, arriving on a United Nations blue, not red carpet, to hear first the Prime Minister's big, serious moment on the main stage.
Humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now.
The leaders of some of the biggest polluters, China, Russia and Turkey, haven't shown keeping much more than a social distance.
The anger and the impatience of the world will be uncontainable unless we make this COP26 in Glasgow the moment when we get real about climate change. They will not forgive us. They will know that Glasgow was the historic turning point when history failed to turn.
The platform also for those people whose way of life is at grave risk right now.
The earth is speaking. She tells us that we have no more time.
The UK is the host to a rainbow of nearly 200 countries and wants them all to promise to cut their own carbon emissions, and the wealthier to cough up more towards the $100 billion pot to help poorer countries go green. But what are the chances?
Do you think leaders are finally giving us the urgency it needs?
I think you couldn't sit in that room and not feel the urgency.
I must say that coming out of the G20, I was optimistic.
I have to do my speech now.
There is a real sense of purpose here, but all the leaders, President Biden included, must be aware it'll be a long fortnight. Simply, not every leader is as enthusiastic as the West with wealthier populations. Some of the mega economies are moving far slower than the UK would like. The Indian Prime Minister promised today that he would balance carbon emissions with absorbing those gases 20 years later than Boris Johnson wants, net zero only by 2070. But the mood in Glasgow is perhaps darkening towards those who are dragging their feet.
In 2 generations' time, they will be remembered for this fortnight. They could have been brilliant in everything else they've done, and they will be cursed if they don't get this right.
That's interesting. You use the phrase curse, which, you know, for somebody in your position of authority, that's a very strong word to use.
It was consciously a strong word. It will be, people will speak of them in far stronger terms than we speak today of the politicians of the 30s, of the politicians who ignored what was happening in Nazi Germany, because this will kill people all around the world for generations, and we will have no means of averting it.
He later apologised for making the comparison to the Nazi genocide. Number 10 stepped down, commenting on the nature of those claims, but said there's no doubt about the seriousness of the climate challenge, and have no doubt that every lever of every kind of British power is being pulled, at least this week, to push for an agreement. 3 generations of the royal family will be visible in one way or another. The attention justified by what many here see as an emergency. It's only day 1 of a discussion. It's already taken more than 2 decades, but the consequences of Glasgow's conversation will be felt far longer than that. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Glasgow.
Well, there are some very specific climate targets to be discussed here in the coming 12 days. The main goal, the most important by far according to experts, is to keep the rise in global warming to 1.5 degrees to avert the worst effects of climate change. So far, the rise in temperature has already reached at least 1.1 degrees above the average level of the pre-industrial period. And the problem is that even if current pledges are honoured, the world is still on course for a hugely damaging increase of 2.7 degrees by the end of the century. Our science editor David Chuckman looks now at what the negotiators need to achieve in the days ahead.
The world is heating up, and despite all the talk about climate change, we're still heading for catastrophic temperatures. So this is a chance to pick a safer course. But these giant conferences, bringing together thousands of people over the past 25 years, have always been challenging. This is the 10th that I've been to.
It's amazing that despite the pandemic, so many people have managed to get here. The rule is to be masked up whenever you're moving around. And the main focus for all the delegates who are here actually happens in giant meeting halls through there. That's where they've got to tackle the toughest question.
What matters most is emissions of the gases heating the planet. They're heading in the wrong direction, projected to rise by 16% by 2030, just as the science couldn't be clearer that they need to fall by 45% over that time. And the fear is that this is rebounding on us.
It's time to say enough. Enough of brutalizing biodiversity. Enough of killing ourselves with carbon. Enough of treating nature like a toilet. Enough of burning and drilling and mining our way deeper. We are digging our own graves.
Powerful words, but with nearly 200 countries represented here, there are so many different agendas. That's why progress is usually slow.
If you're sitting down, you can take your mask off, and it's often in places like this that small informal groups of negotiators will get together to try to crack the hardest questions, like getting aid to the poorest nations who are hit hardest by climate change. I've seen for myself how droughts and other extremes of weather can devastate the nations least able to cope. There was a promise of assistance more than a decade ago, but it still hasn't been fulfilled.
The faith in the international process, it becomes a little weaker. There's a lot of distrust. There's a lot of unhappiness because we keep saying everybody has to do this together, but some have more responsibility than others.
And while the talks are underway, the countries show off what they're doing for climate change. And the hope is to encourage practical steps, like phasing out coal, the dirtiest of the fossil fuels, and pushing the spread of cleaner electric vehicles. And that's the message from Sir David Attenborough, that humans can be the greatest problem solvers.
In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery. That desperate hope, ladies and gentlemen, is why the world is looking to you and why you are here. Thank you.
A call to action, well received, but what matters now is how the governments of the world actually respond.
Well, let's try to work out where we stand after the end of this first formal day. David Chuckman, our science editor, is inside the Summit Centre for us. And David, we've had India and China, both very big players, of course, saying things today as well. What's that amounted to?
Well, certainly the announcement by India has got a lot of people talking, because for years, India, one of the world's big polluters, has resisted any commitment on this agenda, saying it's a developing country and shouldn't have to give those kind of promises. But now we've had them say they want to be producing half their power from renewable sources by 2030 and to be net zero by 2070. Now that's clearly far later than most other countries and far too late in terms of the climate science, but it does show a new level of political engagement which is being pretty widely welcomed. By contrast, President Xi of China has kind of stuck to his original position of when they're going to decarbonize, and in fact shifting the blame onto the West and saying that the burden of tackling climate change should be carried by the countries that industrialized first. And meanwhile, the small island nations who fear their future existence because of the rise in sea levels driven by higher temperatures are so fed up and impatient with the foot dragging in this process that they're considering going to a UN tribunal to try to win compensation from the richest nations for the mess that everybody's got into. So there's a mountain to climb still in terms of tackling this problem.
David, many thanks again. David Chuckman there, our science editor. Now, David, I should explain, is in one part of the conference arena, which is just across the River Clyde from BBC Scotland. And in another part of the arena, we can join our political editor, Laura Kuensberg. Laura, we heard the Prime Minister was very, very clear in spelling out what he saw as the dangers. What are they telling you, though, about, levels of optimism or pessimism around the outcomes?
Hugh, I think Downing Street's view for some months, actually, as they've been working up to this, has been that it's not impossible that they will be able to achieve that 1.5 target that you explained a few minutes ago. That is their sort of headline ambition, to try credibly at the end of this fortnight to say, yeah, that is still potentially in touching distance, and countries gathering here at this huge event have been able to do enough to keep the prospect of that limiting of rising temperatures to that level of 1.5. But they've also always believed, and as they certainly do today, that it will be extremely difficult to get there. This is about big politics, big cash, big international diplomacy and rivalries too. What I would say, though, is it also depends what you define success as being. It may well be this week, and I think it's very likely that there'll also be a real sprinkling of other kinds of specific announcements, whether that is big promises about planting millions more trees around the world, or more promises on new kinds of technology that's coming forward in different parts of the world. So just as we'll be keeping a close eye on presidents and prime ministers wandering through this vast complex, it would be wise to keep a close eye on all of the individual announcements coming out over this next fortnight too. One reminder, remember, it's a huge day here, the opening of everything, but it is only day one.
Indeed, Laura. Many thanks once again. Laura Günzberg in the conference centre for us. We'll have more from the Climate Summit a little later in the programme, but now let's have the day's other news. Let's join Clive.
Hugh, many thanks for that. Now, the driver of one of two trains involved in a collision last night near Salisbury in Wiltshire has suffered injuries believed to be life-threatening. An investigation is underway into the cause of the crash, which injured several other people. The collision happened at Fisherton Tunnel in Salisbury around 7 o'clock in the evening. The line will remain closed for the next 3 days, affecting services linking Cardiff and Bristol with the south coast. John Kay has the latest and a warning his report contains some flashing images.
Questions tonight at the Fisherton Tunnel. These two trains were travelling into Salisbury in the same direction, but somehow collided and ended up side by side.
It mostly hurts in my shoulder up here. That's where the major sprain is that I've been told. So.
Cameron was on board, heading home from a Halloween party, about to get off when suddenly...
This most awful noise of which I now know is the two trains hitting each other, violently being thrown about as the train they collide and my train started going at an angle. There's this huge whoosh of fire and sparks. But it's quite scary seeing people with blood on their face or like blood on their masks and clothes. We're at a halt in darkness and there's just panic.
Through the window, Cameron took this picture of the other train crashed alongside.
So you're waiting in the dark. What's that wait like?
Time just stretches out and out and out, and it was only when we heard like someone had spotted like the blue lights on the bridge that's not far from the tunnel that was any idea that help was coming.
To start with, it was thought the Great Western Railway's train had derailed after hitting something in the tunnel, and that the second South Western train had then crashed into it. But this evening, British Transport Police said they have not found any evidence that the first train struck an object. This is now a major investigation. There were almost 100 people on board the two trains. Around 30 of them were treated for minor injuries.
Unfortunately, the driver of the train was more seriously injured, and his injuries are believed to be life-changing. He remains in hospital in a stable condition this morning.
Investigators are trying to establish whether the driver of the first train managed to press the alarm to warn other trains through the signalling system.
When you see pictures of the scene in daylight now, what do you make of what happened?
I think daylight brings about the seriousness of the situation. It kind of reinforces just like we kind of got really, really lucky in that this wasn't something so much worse.
It could be days before the tunnel entrance is cleared and services can resume.
Well, it's nearly 24 hours now since the crash happened here, and Cameron told me he will never ever forget those moments stuck in the carriage, in the dark, injured, knowing that two trains had already collided and knowing that a third train was due to enter the tunnel any moment. Like him, people around here are thinking of those injured tonight and also are extremely grateful that nobody was killed. Clive.
John, thank you. John Kay there in Salisbury. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the UK won't roll over in the row with France on post-Brexit fishing rights. Paris has threatened to block its ports to British boats from tomorrow if French vessels aren't given more permits to fish in British waters. But Ms Truss says the number issued is entirely in accordance with agreements. Our political correspondent Damien Grammaticus has more details.
Storm clouds threatening. It's all quiet for now in Jersey, calm in the harbour. There's just hours to the French deadline, and fishermen here are already finding themselves tangled in this dispute. For decades, Natalie Porritt's family have exported the catch made here, selling it in France. But she's just been notified that from tomorrow she should stay away from the port of Saint Malo.
We've never seen the industry stop bar COVID. I think we had 2 or 3 weeks where we didn't export into European markets, but for 40 plus years we've worked well with our French neighbours, and I feel saddened that this day has arrived.
All sides were locked in meetings today, but it comes down to Jersey's authorities deciding which boats get permission to fish in its waters.
We won't succumb to political threats or rhetoric or anecdote. It's clear. at least 10 days fishing in any one of the last 3 years, show that you have done that and you're entitled to a licence.
What's extraordinary is that this is a dispute about just a few dozen fishing licences, and it's threatening the relationship between the UK and France. France says it's entitled to them under the terms of its trade deal with the UK. The UK, that those boats can't prove they should have access to British and Jersey waters. France's Prime Minister Jean Castex, in a letter to the EU last week, urged action under the trade deal, saying the EU must show it is absolutely determined to ensure the UK fully respects the agreement. If no satisfactory solution can be found, the EU must take corrective measures by putting tariffs on some fisheries products. And he listed access to ports. At the Climate Summit, clenched fists from the French President and the Prime Minister. This was a friendly greeting, but on this issue both sides have been digging in. Emmanuel Macron has said it's the UK that must shift, the UK that France must back down.
They have behaved unfairly. The fishing licences were awarded entirely in accordance with the trade deal we negotiated, and we now need them to withdraw those unreasonable threats that they've made.
And with both sides now threatening to take action, this is a dispute getting ever harder to unknot. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News.
The Barclays chief executive, Jess Daly, has resigned after an inquiry into his links with the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The city watchdog and the Bank of England have been looking into whether Mr. Staley's relationship with the late financier was closer than first thought. Barclays says it's been made aware of the conclusions of the investigation and Mr. Staley's intention to contest the findings. Our business editor Simon Jack is here. So what did the regulators find that prompted the resignation?
Well, Jess Staley, before he joined Barclays, worked for JP Morgan, where Jeffrey Epstein was a very important client. And Jess Staley doesn't deny he had a relationship with him, but he always insists that it was purely professional. Now, when the charges against Jeffrey Epstein emerged, the Barclays Bank board asked him to give an account to them of what that relationship was like. He insists it was purely professional. The preliminary findings of the regulator, however, say the volume and tone of emails between the two men suggest, as you say, that that relationship was closer than thought. Now, what it did not find that there was any evidence that Mr. Staley knew, was party to or involved in any of the activities for which Mr. Epstein was convicted. And Mr. Staley intends to contest the findings of this report. But this is not his first run-in with the regulator. In 2018, he took it upon himself to try and track down a whistleblower for which he was fined £642,000 and the bank £15 million. So he was sort of on a yellow card. And the bank and Mr. Staley both thought that he couldn't continue to run the bank while he is in open dispute with the regulator. This came completely out of the blue, and I'm told that Mr. Staley today is shell-shocked, angry and upset.
OK, Simon, many thanks. Simon Jack there. The Queen has been pictured driving in the grounds of Windsor Castle, the first time she's been seen in public since being told by her doctors to rest for 2 weeks. She was photographed in a headscarf and sunglasses behind the wheel of a green Jaguar estate car. The palace says doctors have told the Queen she could continue to undertake light desk-based duties, including some virtual audiences, but not to undertake any official visits. The price of diesel has hit a new record high. The motoring organisation, the RAC, says the average price across the UK was nearly £1.48 yesterday, surpassing the record set in 2012. Tottenham have sacked their head coach Nuno Espirito Santo after just 17 games in charge. He won the Premier League Manager of the Month award for August, but Spurs have lost 5 of their last 7 games, including Saturday's 3-0 home defeat to Manchester United. England's cricketers are on the brink of the semi-finals of the T20 World Cup after their 4th win of the tournament. An outstanding performance from Josh Buttler helped them maintain their perfect record after beating Sri Lanka. Here's Joe Wilson.
England's invincible batters. Where's this going? Oh, there. It's a World Cup, and Sri Lanka were desperate to win this match. Here's another.
Oh, that's out.
Early wickets made spirits soar in those seats. Who's left? Well, Josh Buttler. Nobody hits a cricket ball better. He paced this innings. By the time he'd finished, England's total was 163. Sri Lanka's shock. How did they get that far? Facing the last ball, Butler needed a 6 to reach his personal 100.
He is enjoying a fantastic tournament.
It is so hard to make it look that easy. But Sri Lanka have their big hitters too. Wanindo Hasaranga kept the chase on. England's fastest bowler, Tamal Mills, went off. He's had wretched luck with injuries. Sri Lanka still hunting. Jos Buttler had the ball. What?
Oh, brilliant from Jos Buttler.
Watch this run out. Sri Lanka soon 137 all out. Jos Buttler, just perfect. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Now, let's return to our top story, the climate summit, COP26, and to Hugh, who's in Glasgow. Hugh.
Clive, many thanks and welcome back to the banks of the Clyde in Glasgow, where that COP26 climate summit is taking place. And this global event has brought, we think, around 25,000 delegates to Scotland's biggest city. And it's certainly caused plenty of disruption here. But it's also a good opportunity for Glasgow to demonstrate its own efforts to reduce carbon emissions with the target of net zero by 2030. Our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, has the story.
Watertight security, road closures and congestion may be a small price to pay for a global climate agreement bearing Glasgow's name. Free, fully electric buses are running around the city. Visitors at the bus depot get a full virtual reality glimpse of what a greener Glasgow could look like.
Of zero carbon transport.
This is the largest electric vehicle charging hub in the UK, with the capacity to power a small town or 150 fully electric buses.
Total cost of ownership now is at a point where it's level with diesel, or maybe even going slightly lower than diesel. It means that we can start moving to electric vehicles and we can then keep the fares as low as we possibly can to the customers.
This whole setup cost £9 million, with 75% of the cost met by the Scottish Government. Scotland is aiming to get to net zero 5 years before the rest of the UK by 2045. COP26 provides Glasgow, the whole of Scotland in fact, with an opportunity to showcase its green credentials. But it also brings increased scrutiny. The Scottish Government has missed its climate targets for each of the last 3 years. Increased investment in transport is a major plank in its catch-up plan.
With a wee scrub up will be absolutely perfect.
Buying and selling second-hand goods is nothing new, quite literally, but can significantly reduce your carbon footprint. This children's shop is one part of Glasgow's efforts to be one of the world's first cities with a circular economy. That's one that eliminates waste by reusing products and materials.
I think in the past, even operations like this, we talk about our low-cost goods and the quality and choice of stuff that we've got, and maybe we've been a little bit scared to talk about the environmental impact. We've not wanted to seem too green or hippie, but actually people now, that is the conversation.
Charity workers who are nurturing parts of Glasgow's urban woodland demand COP26 succeeds.
I hope it will. It has to. It must do. And if it doesn't, then we have the right to be incredibly angry.
I have more faith in the grassroots things that are happening in Glasgow and around the world than I do in the COP system.
Glasgow's own environment is being tested now by a bin workers' strike over the next week. Piles of rubbish are not what anyone wants this summit to be remembered for. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Glasgow.
Just to let you know that later this evening on BBC One, there's a chance to hear from an audience of young people on what they want this summit to achieve. Here's Kirsty Walk.
We're here at COP26 in Glasgow with a young audience from all over the world. They're going to be putting 4 international political figures on the spot about everything from coal mining to electric cars. Do join us. That's at 10:30 on BBC One.
That's Kirsty looking ahead to the debate later on. Let's have a look at the weather now and join Nick. Hello, Nick.
Hi, Hugh. More rainbows than white rabbits on show today. It's been a showery first day of the month after an October which was not just wetter but warmer than average, with the Met Office saying the average temperature about 1.4 degrees Celsius above what we expect in the normal long-term October average. But if you've been out and about today, you'll notice it has turned colder, and there's more of that to come over the next few days. Low pressure that brought the stormy weekend is pulling away. There are showers following, but overall it's drier, but the air turning round to a northerly flow, lowering the temperatures. There are still showers out there this evening across many western parts of the UK going into the night, but some will trickle towards parts of Yorkshire and the Midlands as the night goes on. Many places, though, looking dry, clear, and with the wind easing a little further, particularly across parts of Wales, southern and eastern England. This is where we're going to have a much colder night to come, and temperatures will fall close to freezing, especially in rural areas, for a touch of frost going into the morning. So it is going to be a chilly start to the day tomorrow. For many of us, though, it will start with some blue sky and sunshine. There'll be showers from the word go, though, in northern Scotland, some heavy, maybe with the risk of hail and thunder. Some will push further south across Scotland during the day. The chance of a shower in Northern Ireland increasing, showers towards Wales and western parts of England, many central and eastern areas dry. The winds are lighter, though it's still blustery with the showers in northern Scotland. And yes, it is feeling colder out there, with temperatures across the UK mainly in the range of 9 to 12 degrees Celsius. And it's another chilly night to come on Tuesday night, again with the risk of frost out there as well. There'll still be a few showers, mainly affecting some coastal areas. Not just the chance of frost increasing, but also fog patches too across parts of England and Wales that may be quite dense and slow to clear going into Wednesday morning. And then on Wednesday, whilst many places will stay dry, you'll notice the showers mainly around coastal areas. The chance of showers increasing along North Sea coast. There's an increasing northerly breeze here, pushing them in, and temperatures more places just into single figures on Wednesday. So we're losing a degree or two compared with what we have tomorrow. It does look like Thursday is going to be the coldest day of the week. Again, there could be some fog patches and a touch of frost as we start the day. There'll be showers along North Sea coasts on Thursday. Many places will be dry. And then just going into the weekend, temperatures edge a little back up again, with some rain moving into parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. That's how it's looking for the week ahead.
Nick, thanks very much again. That was Nick Miller there with the weather. And that's all from Glasgow for now, so it's goodbye from us. We will be back at 10 for the latest on the COP26 Summit, and we'll be looking again at the challenges facing the negotiators in the 12 days to come. But now on BBC One, it's time to join our news teams where you are. Bye for now.